The lights in the delivery room were blindingly bright. My hands were clenched so tightly around the bedsheets that the veins on my knuckles stood out, and sweat had stuck my hair to my neck. The midwife's voice sounded muffled, as if through a layer of water. "Push! The head is out." The woman in the next bed cried out her husband's name, while her mother-in-law stuffed ginseng slices into her mouth to give her strength. "There's no one here. 3 hours ago, a taxi dropped me off at the hospital entrance. My water broke and is flowing down my legs. The number I know by heart is constantly busy." Finally, I called my best friend Kylie, who was on a business trip. She screamed over the phone, "Grace, hold on. I'll find someone right away." "Hold on?" I smiled wryly and dug my fingernails into my palms. 5 years ago, that absurd incident should have made me think about today. At the time, I had just graduated and was working part-time as a waiter at the Lost Bar. While delivering drinks to a VIP room, I bumped into a man. He was sunk into the dark red sofa, his white shirt unbuttoned to his chest, revealing collarbones as sharp as knife blades. His eyes were unfocused, and his entire body was burning hot. The head waiter gave me a nudge and whispered, "Harry's had too much to drink. Bring him a glass of ice water." He handed me the ice water, and I grabbed his wrist. His palm was burning hot against my skin, like a branding iron. "Don't go," he said hoarsely, reeking of alcohol. I couldn't break free. He was incredibly strong, his hot breath blowing against the side of my neck. The private room door closed behind me. The lighting was dim, and the air was thick. Chaos and heat filled the room. It was like a dream I couldn't wake up from. When I woke up, I was alone in the VIP suite. On the bedside table was a check with a string of zeros after the amount. There was also a note with cold, hard print, "Forget about last night. Signed, Harry." I tore up the check. I crumpled up the sticky note and threw it in the trash can. When I emerged from the maze, it was just dawn. The city was gray, as if covered with dirty snow. 2 months later, 2 lines appeared on the pregnancy test. The doctor looked at the ultrasound report, pushed his glasses up, and said, "Triplets. That's very rare." I clutched the report, my fingertips cold. 3 little hearts were beating inside her body. "I'll take care of you once you're born," Kylie said, her eyes red, patting her chest. I didn't let her raise it. During the day, I worked as a designer at an advertising company, and at night I did freelance drawing. Formula, diapers, kindergarten tuition. I was bent over double. When I was exhausted, I hated it. I hated Harry for leaving the check. I hated myself even more for not tearing it up. "Wow." The first cry pierced the air. I collapsed, exhausted. "Congratulations, it's a little prince." The nurse held up the red, chubby little bundle. I hadn't even caught my breath yet. "The second head is out. Push." The second cry was even louder. "It's another boy." My vision went black and my ears rang. "One more. Hang in there." When the third cry rang out, I was completely exhausted. The nurse placed the 3 swaddled babies side by side on my chest. They were heavy, pressing down on my chest so hard it felt like it was on fire. Their wrinkled little faces looked like 3 red-skinned monkeys. The eldest had a small mole between his eyebrows. The second had a light brown birthmark on his right ankle. The third was sucking his finger and had fallen asleep. Tears finally fell. They were hot. 5 years. The eldest is Andy, the second is Jeff, and the third is George. I named them. Like trees, they take root and grow, like streams, they flow freely, like stars, they never fade. Don't be like their father, cold as a block of ice that can't be melted. And don't be like me, soft as dough that can be kneaded by anyone. Life is like a tightly wound spinning top. Work, pick up the kids, cook, put them to bed. Sleep is fragmented. The woman in the mirror has fine lines at the corners of her eyes. The only thing that hasn't changed is her gaze. It was raining heavily on Friday. When the kindergarten called, I was being forced by the client to revise the 8th draft of a proposal. George's mom, George has a fever of 38.9 degrees. I grabbed my bag and rushed out into the rain. The subway was packed like sardines in a can, my wet clothes clinging to my back, sticky and cold. When I arrived at the kindergarten, George's little face was burning red, and he was curled up in the teacher's arms, whimpering. I picked up my hot little son with one arm and held my eldest and second sons, who were carrying their backpacks, with the other. The umbrella was blown over by the wind, and the frame was broken. The rain poured down on us. I tried to hail a taxi by the side of the road, but there wasn't a single empty one. Andy suddenly pointed across the street. "Mom. A cake shop. Today is his birthday. He's been talking about eating strawberry cake since last week." I wiped the rain off my face. "We'll buy it another day. Let's take your brother home first." Andy pouted and whispered, "Kids always get cake on their birthdays." My heart ached. "Wait here." I shoved the 3 children under the eaves of a convenience store on the street. I rushed into the rain. The glass door of the cake shop was reflecting light. I didn't notice the slippery tiles on the floor. Bang! I fell forward. The cake flew out and smeared all over the floor. My knees hurt like hell, and my palms were burning. The shop assistant ran out to help me. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Under the eaves of the convenience store, 3 pairs of eyes stared at me in fear. Jeff burst into tears. Rain mixed with tears streamed down my face. I didn't know if it was the pain in my knees or the string that had been stretched for 5 years in my heart that finally snapped. The phone vibrated in the soaked bag. An unfamiliar number. She answered, and a cold, harsh male voice cut in. "Ms. Grace? This is Harry. We need to talk about something that happened 5 years ago. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., 66th floor of the Cloud Peak Tower. Don't be late." The next day, at the Yunding building. The elevator ascended silently. The mirrored walls reflected my face. It was pale, with dark circles under my eyes. I was wearing the only decent suit I owned, which I had bought 5 years ago. It was a little tight. 66 floors. The marble floor was so shiny you could see your reflection in it, and it was silent underfoot. Outside the huge arched windows, the city sprawled out below. The air was filled with the cold scent of pine. The secretary pushed open the heavy walnut door. "Harry, Grace is here." The man behind the huge desk looked up. Time had been kind to him. His features were still deep and sharp, but his contours were a bit harder. An expensive black shirt, cuffs rolled up, revealing a sliver of cold white wrist. The watch reflected a cold light. He lifted his eyelids and looked at me. His gaze was like a scalpel, cold and precise. "Sit." I sat down, the sofa soft as a trap. He leaned back in his chair, a cigarette between his fingers. "Grace." My name rolled off his lips, cool and scrutinizing. "Yesterday on the phone, I mentioned 5 years ago." He paused, his gaze fixed on me. "Lost bar, VIP room. You were a waitress at the time. After that night, you disappeared. Until the day before yesterday, my people found out that you had given birth to a child." He leaned forward, and I felt a sense of oppression. "My child?" The last few words echoed in the empty office. I met his gaze. "Harry." My voice was steadier than I expected. "That night 5 years ago was a mistake. The child is mine. It has nothing to do with you." He snorted. "It's none of my business?" The cigarette spun between his fingers. "Paternity test, yes or no?" "No, that's fine." He opened the drawer and tossed out a stack of photos. They scattered across the smooth desk surface. Andy was running in the kindergarten sports day. Jeff was lying on the drawing board at the youth center, doodling. George was holding a baby bottle, basking in the sun in the neighborhood garden. Every single photo was captured with crystal clear clarity. My back was instantly drenched in cold sweat. "What are you trying to do?" He leaned back in his chair, looking relaxed, like a predator toying with its prey. 2 choices. First, get it appraised. If it's mine, the child is mine. Second, refuse the appraisal. The corners of his lips curled into a cold smile. The consequences, you can't afford. My fingernails dug deeply into the palm of my hand. The pain brought me back to my senses. Harry. I stood up and looked down at him. This is a society governed by law. You can't just take someone else's child away because you have money and power. A hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. It quickly turned into a deeper look of amusement. Is that so? He pressed the internal phone. Secretary, please ask the security manager to come up. He hung up the phone. He looked at me like I was a rabbit that had wandered into a trap. I forgot to tell you. I'm the biggest donor to this kindergarten. I'm also the sponsor of the painting class at the youth center. As for the neighborhood you're renting. He smiled slightly, his voice cold and piercing. LS Real Estate Development. The door opened. A man in a black uniform walked in, expressionless, like a moving wall of iron. Harry. Harry didn't look at me, his voice light and casual. Follow this Grace. She has 3 little boys. Invite them over for a visit. Be polite. Yes. The towering man turned to me and gestured for me to go. Grace, please. Fear poured over me like ice water, freezing my limbs. I couldn't let him take the child away. Absolutely not. Wait. My voice was shrill and piercing. Harry raised his hand to stop the security manager. He looked at me as if I were a small animal that had finally surrendered. Changed your mind? I clenched my teeth tightly, tasting the metallic taste of blood. Conduct the DNA test. A fleeting look of satisfaction flashed across his eyes. Good. The cold white walls of the DNA testing center were sterile, the smell of disinfectant stinging my nose. The doctor in the white coat took saliva samples from me and the children. When the cotton swab was inserted into his mouth, George recoiled in fear. Mommy. His big eyes filled with tears. I held him tightly. Don't be afraid, George, you're not afraid. Andy's face was stern, like an angry little lion, glaring fiercely at Harry outside the glass window. Jeff, on the other hand, looked around curiously and whispered, Mom, why does that uncle look a little like us? Outside the glass window, Harry stood leaning against the wall. His expensive suit looked out of place here. Through the glass, his gaze fell heavily on the 3 children. His expression was complex and difficult to read. 3 days of waiting for the results. It felt like being fried in oil. The home phone line had been disconnected. The cell phone signal came and went. Outside the window, downstairs, the black sedan had been parked there for 24 hours. Harry's men. Like a silent warning. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the phone rang. Harry's voice sounded emotionless. The results were in. Bring the kids. It's the 66th floor again. On the huge desk lay a thin manila envelope. The seal at the top was stamped with the bright red seal of the appraisal center, resembling a gruesome wound. Harry sat behind the desk, tapping his fingertips on the tabletop. Tap. 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 It sounded like a drumbeat on the heart. Take a look yourself. He tilted his chin slightly, pointing to the file folder. My palms were sweaty. I walked over and picked up the file folder. It was light, yet felt as heavy as 1,000 pounds. The sound of the seal being torn open was particularly jarring in the silent office. I pulled out the report and my eyes jumped straight to the last page. Based on the DNA analysis results, Harry is the biological father of Andy, Jeff, and George. Support, biological father, in black and white. It was like a red-hot branding iron burning into my eyes. Everything went black before my eyes. I leaned on the edge of the table to steady myself. Now, what else is there to say? Harry's voice came from above me. It was cold, with an air of absolute certainty. I slowly raised my head. I looked at him. I looked at the face that resembled my children's. 5 years of grievances, anger, resentment, fear, all emotions exploded. Harry! Her voice trembled uncontrollably. These past 5 years. Where were you? Where were you when I was pregnant and squeezing onto the subway for prenatal checkups? Where were you when I was giving birth to 3 children alone in the delivery room and nearly died on the operating table? Where were you when the children had a fever and I was holding them in the pouring rain and couldn't get a taxi? Now. What gives you the right? What gives you the right to come here with this piece of paper and take my children away from me? Back then, you just left a check and walked away. I interrupted him, my voice hoarse. Like you were dismissing a prostitute. I didn't take the check. I risked my life to give birth to that child. I raised him with my own milk and food. What else did you do besides contribute a sperm? Biological father? I grabbed the report and slammed it down in front of him. You dare? The office fell silent. Only my heavy breathing could be heard. Harry's face was ashen. He stared at the scattered report papers, his thin lips pressed into a cold, straight line. What do you want? He spoke, his voice cold and deep. Money? A house? Or your wife's position? Every word was like a poisoned needle, piercing my heart. I looked at him and suddenly laughed. I laughed until tears came out. Harry. You think anyone cares about your stinking money? Take your money and get out of my life and my child's life. The child is mine. Always and forever. I turned and walked away. Her hand touched the cold brass doorknob. Behind her, he spoke, his voice strained with anger. Stop. Grace. He rose abruptly, the chair leg scraping the floor with a loud noise. You can go. But the child must stay. Otherwise, the door would be pushed open. The security manager, who looked like a towering iron tower, stood in front of the door like a wall. His face was expressionless. His eyes were cold. There was no way out. Despair wrapped around my heart like cold vines. Mom. A childish cry came from the rest area outside the door. 3 small figures broke free from the secretary's grasp and rushed over like cannonballs. Andy charged like an angry little lion, colliding with the security manager's leg. Bad guy. Don't bully my mom. The security manager didn't budge. Jeff rushed over and hugged my leg, his face pale, crying so hard he could barely breathe. George was terrified and stood there crying loudly. Mommy, go home. George wants to go home. My heart was torn apart. I picked up George, who was crying and shaking, and hugged Jeff. Andy spread his short arms like a mother hen protecting her chicks, blocking me in front of Harry and glaring at him fiercely. You jerk. Stay away from my mom. Harry's gaze fell on Andy's stubborn little face. The small mole between his eyebrows was identical to his own. The icy expression on his face seemed to crack open a tiny fissure. Andy. He called out the name, his voice sounding a bit awkward. Andy reacted like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Don't you dare call me by my name. You jerk. Harry wasn't angry. His gaze swept over Jeff, who was crying and hiccuping, and landed on George's face, which was buried in my arms. The little guy was crying so hard that his face was streaked with tears, his long eyelashes wet and sticky, and his little nose twitching. Harry's Adam's apple moved almost imperceptibly. He raised his hand. The security manager silently stepped back. Take the children downstairs to the dessert area, Harry said to his secretary. The secretary hurried forward, forcing a smile. Little one, would you like to go eat ice cream with Auntie? There's strawberry flavor. Andy clung to my legs cautiously. No way. You're the bad guy's accomplice. Jeff looked up at me timidly. Mom. George buried his face in the crook of my neck, his little body still trembling. I took a deep breath and suppressed the emotions welling up inside me. I crouched down and looked the three children in the eye. Andy, Jeff, George. Listen to your mother. Your mother and this. I paused, struggling to get the words out. Uncle, we need to talk. Go with Auntie to eat ice cream. I promise I'll come find you soon. Mom assured us. Andy looked at me, then at Harry, his little brow furrowed tightly. If he bullies you again, just shout. I'll protect you. My nose stung, and I nodded vigorously. Okay. Watching the secretary lead the children, who were looking back every few steps, into the elevator, the soft expression on my face vanished instantly. I turned around and closed the door, shutting out the outside world. Only he and I remained in the office. The air was thick and heavy. Harry. I looked at him, speaking slowly and deliberately. My children are my life. If you dare touch them, I'll fight you to the death. Those with nothing to lose have nothing to fear. If you don't believe me, try it. He leaned against the edge of the table and lit a cigarette. The smoke blurred his cold, hard features. Grace. 5 years, I didn't know. It was my negligence. But blood cannot be changed. They are Harry's sons. The bloodline of the family cannot be scattered abroad. Follow you, live in a rented apartment? Crowd onto the subway? Attend an ordinary kindergarten? He tapped the ash from his cigarette, his tone carrying a condescending judgment. What can you offer them? I laughed. What I gave them, you can never give them. I gave them a hot meal, a hug, and a bedtime story. I gave them the courage to stand up for themselves when they were bullied, and I stayed up all night to take care of them when they were sick. I gave them my unconditional love. Harry. Ask yourself. Besides cold hard cash and so-called blood ties, what else can you give them? His fingers holding the cigarette paused. The smoke swirled around, obscuring his eyes. Silence. Like a cold tide, it engulfed the entire space. After a long time, he stubbed out the cigarette butt. 3 months. He raised his eyes, his gaze sharp as a hawk's. Keep the children with you. I will give them 3 months to adjust. During this time, I will intervene in their lives. After 3 months, they must return to the family. They will receive the best education and have everything they need. As compensation. He opened the drawer, took out a document, and pushed it toward me. A 300 square meter apartment in the city center. 50 million in cash. Or, he paused, 1% of LS Group's shares. The cold numbers and terms on the document glistened with an alluring yet ironic light. I didn't even touch the document. Harry. Children aren't commodities. 3 months is fine. But on one condition, I said, looking him straight in the eye. For the next 3 months, you must take care of them yourself, like a real father. No hiring help. No spending money on them. I want you to experience firsthand what it's like to raise 3 children. If you can't do it, or if they don't want to go with you, then get out of our lives forever. A fleeting look of surprise flashed across his eyes. It quickly turned into a cold, probing gaze. Grace. Are you negotiating with me? Yes. I didn't back down. Want to bet? He stared at me, as if assessing the value of an item. He uttered 2 words. Deal. The next day was Saturday. The doorbell rang just as I was throwing the burnt eggs into the trash can. Jeff ran barefoot to open the door. Uncle? He tilted his little head and looked at the man in a suit standing outside the door. Harry stood at the door, holding a huge toy gift box emblazoned with a luxury brand logo. It looked out of place against the dilapidated hallway behind him. He furrowed his brow slightly, surveying the small house, which was less than 60 square meters and filled with toys and picture books. You let them live in a place like this? It's not even as good as your mansion. I was wearing an apron, my tone calm. But this is home. Harry didn't respond. He placed the toy gift box on the only relatively tidy sofa. Andy, Jeff, George, these are for you. Andy looked up from the pile of building blocks, glanced over, hummed, and continued building his space fortress. Jeff was a little curious and leaned over to touch the shiny packaging. George held his bottle and asked in a baby voice, "Uncle, is there strawberry cake?" I held back a laugh. "Harry, it's your first day, and you've got a tough job ahead of you. Take them to the amusement park. You're in charge the whole time. No assistants or bodyguards allowed. Don't reserve the entire place. Just be a normal dad." Harry's brow furrowed. Clearly, the term normal dad was beyond his comprehension. The amusement park on the weekend. Crowds of people. Screams, music, and the sweet, cloying smell of popcorn mingled together. Harry, dressed in a high-end suit, stood among the crowd wearing cartoon t-shirts and sneakers. He looked like a model who had wandered onto the wrong set. The three children were like wild colts breaking free from their reins. "I want to ride the roller coaster." Andy pointed at the winding steel dragon. Harry looked at the nearly vertical drop and his expression changed slightly. "That's dangerous." "Are you scared, Uncle?" Andy raised his little face, full of provocation. Harry's jaw tightened. "No, I'm not scared." 5 minutes later. The roller coaster started. It plunged at high speed, made sharp turns, and hung upside down. Andy screamed excitedly. Jeff closed his eyes tightly. Harry's face was as pale as paper. When he came down, his legs were wobbly, and he held on to the railing beside him, his stomach churning. Andy looked at him with contempt. "Uncle, you're so cowardly." "I want ice cream." Jeff pointed at the pink cotton candy cart. "That's unhealthy." Harry tried to regain his authority. "Mom, let me have some." Jeff pouted. Harry looked at the wet eyes that were identical to Jeff's. "Only one." 3 minutes later. Jeff held up a pink cotton candy that was almost as big as his face. George held a chocolate ice cream cone, eating it with his mouth and hands covered in brown. Harry's expensive suit pants were smeared with sticky chocolate. "Uncle, I want to play bumper cars." Andy spotted a new target. "Uncle, I want that little dinosaur balloon." Jeff pointed to the distance. "Uncle, pick me up. George can't walk anymore." George spread his chocolate-covered hands. Harry was surrounded by 3 children. He was like an eagle being attacked by a flock of chirping sparrows. He was flustered and couldn't keep up with everything. I stood there with my arms crossed, watching from afar. Watching that man who was once a powerful figure in the business world, a man who always got his way, being bossed around by 3 little kids. Sweat was beading on his forehead. His expensive tie was askew. George had messed up his hair. He looked utterly defeated. It was 7 p.m. The amusement park closed. The 3 children were exhausted. Jeff fell asleep on Harry's back, drooling all over his shoulder. Andy was barely staying awake, his eyelids drooping. I was holding George, who was nodding off. Harry's car was parked in the VIP lane. The driver opened the door. He carefully moved Jeff off his back, his movements clumsy and stiff, afraid of waking the child. He sat down in the car. Even the spacious back seat of the luxury car felt cramped at that moment. The child seats were brand new, having been installed in a hurry that afternoon. Harry looked at the 3 little heads sleeping soundly in the child seats. His expression was complicated. Exhaustion, helplessness, and a hint of a tenderness he had never felt before. He began, his voice hoarse. "Are they always this energetic?" "That's nothing." I looked out the window at the neon lights flashing by. Andy sleepwalks in the middle of the night, Jeff is a picky eater and only eats green vegetables, and George wakes up at 4 a.m. every day and needs to be rocked for an hour. Harry fell silent. The car drove into the city. "Harry," I reminded him, "we agreed that you're in charge of putting them to bed tonight." His body stiffened noticeably. We returned to the small rented room and settled Jeff and George, who were already asleep, into the small bed. Andy forced himself to finish washing up, climbed into bed, and hugged his dinosaur toy. "Uncle, tell me a story." Harry sat on the edge of the small children's bed, as if he had been rushed to the execution ground. He held up the well-thumbed copy of the Great Encyclopedia of Dinosaurs and read aloud in a stiff voice, "Tyrannosaurus rex, also known as the tyrant of the dinosaurs, is one of the known carnivorous dinosaurs. Its length." "Its length?" Andy interrupted impatiently, "Uncle, that's not how you do it. Put some feeling into it. Imitate the sound of a Tyrannosaurus rex. Roar." Harry sighed deeply, took a deep breath, and with great difficulty, managed to squeeze out a low, short roar. Andy sneered, "It doesn't look like it at all. Mom did a much better job." Harry's ears turned slightly red in the dim light of the desk lamp. He closed the book. "Go to sleep," he said in his usual commanding tone. Andy pulled the blanket up to his chin, leaving only his eyes exposed, and muttered softly, "Bad uncle." Harry turned off the lamp and walked into the living room. I handed him a glass of water. He took it and drank it all in one gulp. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were traces of Jeff's saliva on his shoulders. "How do you feel, Harry?" I leaned against the doorframe. He loosened his tie and leaned back on the shabby fabric sofa, his eyes closed. His brows were furrowed with exhaustion. "It's more tiring than acquiring 3 listed companies." His voice was hoarse with exhaustion. I smiled softly. "It's only the first day." He opened his eyes, his deep gaze resting on my face. "Grace. These past 5 years, how did you manage?" His voice was soft, tinged with a hint of confusion. I forced a smile. "That's how it was. I had no choice." The air grew still. Only the steady breathing of the children in the room could be heard. The clock on the wall pointed to 11 o'clock. He stood up. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow is the weekend," I interrupted him. "Harry, as agreed, you're in charge for the whole day. Andy has soccer practice at 7 a.m. Jeff has art class at 8:30 a.m. George has early childhood education class at 10 a.m. At lunchtime, Jeff only eats broccoli and carrots, George needs his food cut into small pieces, and Andy hates green peppers. This afternoon." I clearly listed a series of itineraries and precautions. It was like assigning an impossible task. Harry listened, his expression growing increasingly gloomy. Finally, he rubbed his temples. "Got it." His voice was filled with weary resignation. He walked to the door and stopped. He didn't turn around. "Grace. You win." The door closed softly, shutting out the noise of the outside world. I leaned against the door and slowly slid down to the floor. Moonlight shone through the window and fell on the floor. It was cold. In the days that followed, Harry forced his way into our lives in an almost clumsy manner. Every morning at 7 o'clock, the conspicuous black phantom pulls up punctually in front of the dilapidated apartment building, drawing countless stares. Harry, dressed in a suit and tie, frowns as he makes his way through the cluttered hallway. "Dad's here." Jeff cheered and rushed over. Ever since Harry bought him that giant cotton candy at the amusement park, he had changed his nickname. Harry stiffened but didn't correct him. Bending down, I awkwardly picked up Jeff. Andy still had a stern expression on his face, but he was secretly glancing at the new soccer ball Harry had brought. George was holding a baby bottle and babbling, "Uncle, hold me." Harry held Jeff in one arm and tried to pick up George with the other, but his movements were awkward. I held back my laughter and picked up George. "Let's go, we're going to be late for soccer practice." Children's soccer field. On the green grass, a group of 5- and 6-year-old boys are running wildly after the ball. Andy is in the lead, like a small cannonball. Harry is standing on the sidelines. Among a crowd of parents dressed in sportswear and shouting loudly, his tall stature, tailored suit, and stern demeanor made him stand out like a sore thumb. "Andy! Pass the ball," shouted a chubby little boy. Andy ignored him and kept running forward with the ball. "Andy! Pass the ball to your teammate. Harry couldn't help but shout. His voice wasn't loud, but it had his usual commanding tone. Andy stopped in his tracks and lost the ball. He glared angrily at Harry on the sidelines. Halftime. Andy gulped down water and ignored Harry. Why didn't you pass the ball? Harry asked. They're terrible. Andy said stubbornly. Soccer is a team sport, Harry tried to reason. You have to trust your teammates. No way. Andy threw down the water bottle. I can score myself. Father and son stared at each other. The atmosphere was tense. I walked over and rubbed Andy's head. Andy, do you remember who helped you up last time you fell? Andy paused for a moment and looked at the chubby boy next to him. The chubby boy gave him a silly smile. Andy lowered his head and his toes brushed against the grass. It was Sam. That's right, I said softly, sometimes we need help from others, and we can also help others. Isn't it more fun to win together? Andy was silent for a moment. The second half began. When the ball was passed to Andy again, he hesitated for a second. He looked up and saw Harry's tightly pursed lips on the sidelines. He kicked hard. The ball drew an arc and was passed accurately to Sam, who was in a better position. Sam paused for a moment, then reacted and kicked the ball. It was a goal. The children cheered and hugged each other. Andy was tossed into the air by his teammates. In the sunlight, he laughed so hard his teeth were visible. Harry stood on the sidelines, watching his son being tossed into the air. The corners of his stern lips seemed to twitch upward ever so slightly. Afternoon. Jeff's art studio. The theme is my dad. On the other children's drawing paper, Dad is a hero in a police uniform, a doctor wearing glasses, a superhero riding an electric bike. Jeff bit his paintbrush and looked at the blank canvas with worry. He stole a glance at Harry, who was sitting on a small stool, looking out of place. Harry's brow furrowed slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the smell of paint and the noise of the children filling the room. Jeff lowered his head. The brush smeared across the paper. Large patches of black and deep blue. Then, in the center of the oppressive tones, he painted a small, glowing sun in dazzling gold. The teacher walked over and asked softly, Jeff, what are you drawing? Jeff whispered, it's my dad. The teacher looked at the bright golden shape and was a little confused. Your dad, looks like the sun? Jeff shook his head, his voice even quieter. No. It's just, the sun came out, so Dad isn't angry anymore. Harry's body stiffened suddenly. He turned his head. His gaze fell on the drawing paper. In the center of the darkness, the only source of light. He looked at Jeff. The child had his head down, his long eyelashes drooping, his fingers nervously twisting the hem of his shirt. Harry reached out his hand. His large palm, somewhat hesitant, landed on Jeff's soft hair. He rubbed it gently. Jeff looked up in surprise. His gaze met Harry's deep eyes. In those eyes, which were always cold, something seemed to be slowly melting. Jeff grinned, revealing a smile with a missing front tooth. On the way home. George is asleep in his car seat. Andy and Jeff are arguing quietly in the back seat about which Ultraman is more powerful. Harry is driving. Soft piano music is playing on the car stereo. The golden glow of the setting sun shone through the car window, falling on his sharply defined profile. He looked a little less stern. I held George, who was fast asleep, and watched the streets fly by outside the window. Somewhere deep inside me, something seemed to soften. This strange yet peaceful parent-child time lasted for 2 months. Until that day. George had a fever. It came on suddenly in the afternoon at preschool, his little face turning bright red. His temperature was 39.2 degrees Celsius. I rushed into the children's hospital with my scalding little son in my arms. The emergency room was packed. Cries, coughs, and anxious questions mingled together. When Harry hurriedly arrived, I was waiting in line for our number to be called. George slumped on my shoulder, his little face burning hot. "What's wrong?" Harry frowned and reached out to touch George's forehead. George dodged him dazedly and buried his face in my neck. "I don't know, it just suddenly caught fire." I patted George on the back, feeling anxious. "Let's go to a private hospital." Harry took out his phone to call. "No need," I interrupted him. "They can treat him well here." He looked at me, then at the child in my arms who was burning with fever, his face so dark it looked like it could rain. "Grace, you have to be so stubborn?" "This isn't stubbornness." I suppressed my anger. Public hospitals have standardized procedures and experienced doctors. Look at this environment. How long will we have to wait? He pointed to the noisy, crowded corridor. "We'll have to wait as long as it takes." I hugged George tightly. "My child, I know what's best for him." We were stuck in the crowded emergency room corridor, like two porcupines locked in a standoff. "George's family." "George," the nurse shouted, peering around the corner. "Here." I immediately rushed over, holding the child in my arms. The doctor examined him, listened to his chest, and looked at his throat. He diagnosed a viral cold with slightly red tonsils. "Go get a blood test first." There was another long line at the blood test window. George saw the nurse in a white coat holding a needle and started crying loudly. "Mommy, no shots." "George is scared." He clung to me desperately, his little arms wrapped tightly around my neck. Tears and snot smeared all over me. "George, be good, don't be afraid, it'll be over soon. Mommy will hold you." I coaxed him tenderly, almost crying myself. Harry stood nearby, his face ashen. He looked at his son crying his heart out, at the crowded and chaotic environment around him, and at the shiny needle in the nurse's hand. His jaw was clenched tightly. Suddenly, he took a big step forward and snatched the crying and struggling George from my arms. His movements weren't gentle, but they carried an irresistible force. "George." His voice wasn't loud, but it strangely cut through the child's cries. "Look at me." George was stunned by the low voice and looked at him with teary eyes. Harry stared into his son's frightened eyes. "You're a boy. The shot will hurt, but the pain will pass. When you're sick, you have to get treated. Crying won't solve anything." His tone was commanding, with his usual harshness. George stared blankly at him, forgetting to cry. The nurse took the opportunity to grab George's little arm. The needle pricked him. George's little mouth puckered, and he was about to cry again. "Don't cry," Harry said in a low voice, but with an invisible air of authority. George pursed his lips, tears welling up in his eyes, but he didn't dare let them fall. After the blood draw, Harry hugged George and gently patted him on the back. His movements were a little stiff, but they carried a clumsy sense of comfort. "It's okay." George buried his little face in his broad shoulder and sobbed softly. Harry hugged him and walked to the vending machine at the end of the corridor. He inserted a coin. Clang! A bottle of strawberry milk rolled out. He handed it to George in his arms. George held the ice-cold milk bottle and finally stopped sobbing. I stood a few steps away, watching the man who had always been so aloof, holding my little son. He was comforting him in his clumsy way, protecting him with his tough exterior. The icy wall in my heart suddenly collapsed. The test results came back, and it was indeed a viral cold. I was prescribed medication and told to go home and rest. Harry drove us home. George took his medicine and fell asleep in my arms. Andy and Jeff were also exhausted and dozing in the back seat. The car was quiet, with only the faint sound of the air conditioner. Red light. Harry stopped the car. His gaze fell on the rearview mirror. The mirror reflected me holding George. There were also two furry little heads in the back seat. He suddenly spoke. His voice was low, clear in the quiet car. "Grace. These past years. You've worked hard." I held George's hand a little tighter. I didn't say anything. I just lowered my head and gently rubbed my little son's hot forehead. Is it hard work? Of course. But the warmth in my arms is priceless. No amount of money could replace it. The car drove into the neighborhood and stopped in front of the building. Harry got out and opened the back door. He reached out to take the sleeping George. Let me hold him. I hesitated, then carefully handed George over. Harry's arms were steady. He held George, still a little stiff, but much more skillfully than before. I held the sleepy Andy and Jeff by the hand. We walked into the familiar hallway. The motion-activated lights turned on. The dim light illuminated the mottled walls. We walked to the door. I took out my keys and opened the door. Harry stood behind me, holding George. The hallway was narrow. His breath was close. It smelled of crisp pine. The key went into the lock. It turned. Click. The door opened. I was about to go in. Behind me, Harry's low voice rang out. Grace. I stopped in my tracks. I didn't turn around. It's almost been 3 months. His voice was emotionless. The kids are doing well. I can give them the best. Come back with me. The voice-activated lights in the hallway went out. Darkness instantly engulfed us. Only the faint moonlight shining through the window outlined his tall silhouette and my stiff back. George stirred restlessly in my arms. Harry patted him gently. In the darkness, his voice was clear and calm. You, too. My wife's place is yours. I've compensated you for the past 5 years. The air froze. It was like a heavy block of ice, pressing down on them so hard they couldn't breathe. I slowly turned around. In the darkness, I looked at his blurry outline. Harry. My voice was eerily calm. What is this? Charity? Or did you do your due diligence on the kids and then decide to take me along with them? He was silent for a few seconds. Think whatever you want. This is the best arrangement. It's good for the children. And it's not unfair to you either. In the darkness, I laughed silently. Harry. 5 years ago, you left a check. 5 years later, you write an even bigger one. Buy the kids and throw in their mother for good measure? In your eyes, is everything in this world just a price tag? His breathing grew heavier in the darkness. Grace. Don't be ungrateful. What I can give you is something you'll never have in your entire life. I don't want it. I interrupted him before he could finish. The voice-activated light turned on at the sound of my voice. Under the glaring white light, I could clearly see the anger in his eyes. And a hint of shock at being offended. Harry. I looked at him, speaking slowly and deliberately. Your money, your family, your compensation. I don't care about any of it. 3 months have passed. You've met my conditions. Ask the children if they want to go with you. As for me. I took a deep breath. The 4 of us, mother and children, depend on each other for life and death. Wealth is irrelevant. Harry, please go back. I reached out my hand, wanting to take George back from his arms. He suddenly took a step back. His arms tightened as if protecting a precious treasure he had lost and found again. His eyes were sharp as knives. Grace. Must you be so stubborn? For your pitiful sense of pride? Are you going to make the children suffer with you? Self-respect? I laughed, but tears suddenly welled up in my eyes. Harry. These past 5 years. I was holding my feverish child in the rain, unable to hail a taxi. Can self-respect replace a car? When I was working 3 jobs a day and collapsed from exhaustion. Can self-respect be exchanged for money? When my child asks me where his father is. Can self-respect give him a father? I have long since lost my self-respect. I only want my children. I only want them to grow up safely. That is enough. Tears streamed down my face. My vision blurred. I stared at him intently. Give me back my child. I took a step forward. Harry held George tightly and stood still, like a silent mountain. He looked at me. He looked at my tears. He looked at my hysteria. The anger welling up in his eyes gradually subsided. It turned into something deeper and more complex. Was it confusion? Or was it something hard, being silently shattered? George, who was in my arms, was awakened by the noise and began to cry sleepily. Mommy. I want my mommy. Harry finally loosened his grip on my arm. I quickly picked up the crying George and held him tightly in my arms, as if I had found the whole world again. Andy and Jeff were startled awake, rubbing their eyes, looking at us in confusion and fear. Mom. Jeff timidly pulled at the hem of my shirt. Andy, like an angry little leopard, stood in front of me, glaring at Harry. Don't bully my mom. Harry looked at everything in front of him. Looking at me holding my child tightly. Looking at Andy standing in front of me. Looking at Jeff pulling at my sleeve, his eyes filled with anxiety. Looking at George crying in my arms. His tall figure looked somewhat lonely in the narrow hallway. He didn't say anything. He just gave me a deep look. That look was so complex that it was difficult to interpret. Then he turned around and walked down the stairs step by step. Heavy footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway. They grew fainter and fainter until they disappeared. The motion-activated lights went out again. Darkness enveloped the hallway once more. I was holding 3 children. Leaning against the cold wall. Completely exhausted. The next day. Harry didn't show up. The third day. He didn't either. That black car never parked downstairs again. Life seems to have returned to square one. Going to work, picking up the kids, cooking, putting them to bed. But inside, it feels like something is missing. Or maybe it's like a heavy weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Weekend. Take the kids to the park. Andy and Jeff are chasing each other on the grass. George is crouching down watching the ants move house. The sun was shining brightly. I sat on a bench, watching them. My phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Yunding 66th floor. Now. One person. No name. But I knew who it was. My heart sank. What was bound to happen, would happen. I entrusted the children to the familiar auntie at the park management office. I took a taxi to Yunding. 66th floor. Still cold and empty. Harry stood in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling windows. His back was straight, but there was a hint of indescribable loneliness. Hearing footsteps, he turned around. He was holding a document folder. It was exactly the same as the one from the paternity test last time. My heart instantly tightened. What was he up to now? He walked to his desk and put down the file folder. Sit down. His voice was emotionless. I stood still. Harry, just say what you want to say. He looked up at me. His eyes were deep, like a bottomless cold pool. 3 months had passed. I asked the children. He paused, his gaze falling on the document folder. Andy said, wherever Mom goes, I go. Jeff said, I want to play with Uncle, but I want to be with Mom more. George hugged my neck and cried, saying he wanted his mom. He raised his eyes and looked intently at me. Grace. You won. The children chose you. My nerves, which had been tense, suddenly relaxed. My palms were sweaty. So what now? So, he picked up the document folder and handed it to me. This, sign it. More documents? I looked at him warily and didn't take it. Don't worry. He tugged at the corner of his mouth, but there was no smile. It's not a check, and it's not real estate. I hesitantly took it. I pulled out the document. The title caught my eye, LS Group Shareholding Agency and Child Support Agreement. I scanned it quickly. The more I read, the more alarmed I became. The core terms are only 2, Harry voluntarily transfers 5% of the shares of LS Group under his name to his 3 children as an unconditional gift, to be held by me on their behalf until they reach adulthood. Harry voluntarily waives his right to custody and retains only visitation rights. The visitation schedule and arrangements must be negotiated with me, with the premise that they do not affect the child's normal life and wishes. Attached is a thick stack of legal documents regarding the transfer of shares. 5% of LS shares. I dare not imagine how much that is worth. It would be enough to ensure my children a life of comfort and security, standing at a starting point that most people can only dream of. I clutched the stack of papers. My fingertips were ice cold. Harry. What's this supposed to be? A new compensation plan? He walked over to the liquor cabinet, poured 2 glasses of water, placed one in front of me, picked up the other, and took a sip. Grace. I've looked into you over the past 5 years. You're clean. And also. He seemed to be searching for the right word. Difficult. He put down his cup and gazed out the window at the tiny city. These past 3 months, I watched you alone, how you managed to survive in this city with 3 children. I watched Andy kick a ball and fall, breaking his knee, yet he didn't cry. I watched Jeff save the candy he couldn't bear to eat and give it to me. I watched George cling to your fingers when he had a fever. He turned his head and looked at me. Those eyes, always cold, were now filled with a strange emotion. Like dark currents surging beneath solid ice. I'm not a good father. Maybe. I'll never learn to be like you. But at least the voices grew quieter. I wanted to make their lives easier. I wanted to make your life easier. This wasn't charity. He looked at me, speaking slowly. It was their right. As Harry's son, they deserved it. Sign it. The lawyer was waiting outside to notarize it. I held the stack of paper, light as a feather yet heavy as 1,000 pounds. I looked at the man in front of me. He was still tall and cold. But he was different. The hard shell that had kept him at bay had cracked open, revealing a softness and clumsiness that perhaps even he himself had never noticed. After a long silence, I picked up the pen. On the last page, I signed my name, Grace. The handwriting was clear and strong. I put down the pen and looked up at him. Harry. Visitation rights, I agree. But there's one condition. He raised his eyebrows. Speak. Every time you come, you must bring the children yourself. No hiring a playground. No bringing bodyguards or assistants. Just like at the playground. He paused for a moment. Immediately, a slight smile appeared on his cold face. The corners of his mouth turned up very slowly, like the first crack in the ice on a frozen lake in spring. Okay, he agreed, his voice carrying a hint of compromise that was almost inaudible. Was there a hint of relief? I stepped out of the Yunding building. The sunlight was blinding. I squinted. My phone rang. It was Kylie screaming, Grace. Look at the news. Financial headlines. LS Group's shareholding structure has changed. That madman Harry suddenly transferred 5% of his shares to a mysterious person. Is it you? Is it? I smiled. I didn't answer. I hung up the phone. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of freedom. And 3 little treasures were waiting for me to pick them up. I turned around and walked toward the subway station with light steps. A week later. Saturday. The doorbell rang right on time. Jeff ran to open the door, shouting, Dad. Harry stood outside the door. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was dressed simply in a gray cashmere sweater and dark slacks. He looked less like a cold-hearted business tycoon and more like a gentle family man. The huge toy box he was holding in his hands still showed off his rich side. Dad. Jeff rushed over and hugged his legs. Andy stood coolly to the side with his arms crossed, but his eyes were on the toy box. George held up the milk bottle in a baby voice, Daddy. Cake. Harry bent down, picked up Jeff with one arm, and with the other hand, actually pulled out a fancy strawberry cake box from behind his back. George's eyes lit up instantly. I came out of the kitchen wearing an apron. Where are we going today? Harry put Jeff down and handed me the cake. His movements were natural. The Science Museum, he said. Andy wants to see the rocket model. Andy's eyes lit up, but he quickly regained his composure. Humph, I never said that. Harry ignored his sulking and looked at me. Want to go together? Sunlight streamed through the window and fell on him. It was warm. I took off my apron. Let's go. He smiled faintly. He bent down, picked up George with one hand, and took Jeff's hand with the other. His movements were still not very skilled, but he was much more at ease than when he first started. Andy, he looked at the awkward little figure, let's go. Andy walked over slowly. Harry reached out his hand. His large palm landed on Andy's fluffy hair. He rubbed it gently. Andy's body stiffened for a moment, but he didn't pull away. His ears turned red. I locked the door. I looked at the tall man in front of me. He was holding George, who was babbling, in one arm and Jeff, who was chattering away, in the other. Andy, who was clearly excited but trying to act cool, was following behind. The sunlight shone on them, casting long, warm shadows. They followed behind him, step by step, down the stairs, toward the bustling, smoky world below.